welcome everyone. I'm really excited about this particular interview because we're going to talk about what, me as a business owner is always really interested in. And I think pretty much every dentist out there wants to learn is, how to build a more valuable business. At some point, you're going to want to sell your practice, and whether you're a couple of years from selling, let's say you're thinking a couple of years down the line, maybe you're halfway through your career, maybe you're just getting started, like maybe you haven't even bought a practice yet, right? It's really good to understand the different bits and pieces that, can either drive up your revenue, can reduce your revenue, because often, from a marketing standpoint, people come to us thinking, I need more new patients, I got to sprinkle some SEO or something like that on their business. They don't understand, like, there's a lot of operational things that can really make or break you. When you look at the practices that, if you're comparing like $1 million practice to a $3 million practice, it's not like there's the one that's doing 3 times as well has discovered, one weird marketing trick that just like sent them to the moon. It's a lot of like operational efficiencies. They do things really well from, patient standpoint, financial standpoint, collections, like many different elements. And I think, in this interview, we're going to learn a lot about all those different pieces from somebody that I feel is, much more sort of unbiased compared to, sort of like other professionals. If you talk to a social media company, they're going to say your problem is social media, you need to do more of it. If you talk to a lawyer, they're going to see all sorts of legal issues. But tonight's guest is Barb Johns. So she's worked in the dental field for, well over a decade, helped many different practices, dentists buy practices, sell practices, help them transition, help with, refinancing, many different elements like that. And I've known Barb for quite some time now, and, she's a wealth of information. And I think today's topic is going to be something that benefits, every dentist out there. How do you build a more profitable practice? And not only more profitable in the sense of, I want to make more money when I sell it. How do you build the type of practice that you enjoy owning? Because sometimes when people go to sell, they're selling it because they're pulling their hair out and they're just like, just get rid of it. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And that's not a good position to sell from. It's not a good time to sell, right? So ideally, you want to build something that you really love working with. And if something happens, if something changes in your life, you have the opportunity to sell it at a really great price, and you don't feel like you sort of left money on the table. So I want to introduce, we have here Barb Johns. So Barb is a practice broker for Tier 3, which is a division of Henry Schein, massive company. And so Barb, I want to sort of like jump right into it because, this is a topic that I feel like even if you're not a dentist, there's a lot you can learn from this. But let's jump into it. Like, how do you, grow the value of a practice? If people coming to you and saying, hey, how do I get the most, when I go to sell this thing, how do I get the most value for it? How do you sort of approach that conversation with dentists? What do they start looking at? What do they start thinking about? What sort of timeline do they need to think? Tell us, how do you do that? How do you grow the value of your practice?
It's a great question, and thanks for the introduction, Nick. Just to give everybody a little bit of background on me, my dad actually started Tier 3 Brokerage, which got purchased by Henry Schein in 2021. Changed ownership a couple times before it hit Henry Schein, but kind of grew up talking nothing but dental at the dining room table, and that's still the primary topic of conversation. And for a family that doesn't actually have any dentists in it, that's pretty interesting to note. Okay, so let's talk about first what determines the value in your practice. So pretty easy. You've got revenue, you've got expenses, and you've got earnings or cash flow or profit, whatever you want to call it. There we go. So what's the formula needed to improve your value? Simply increase your revenue and reduce your costs. You're going to have greater cash flow and you're going to have greater value. Thanks, guys. It was a great evening. No, if only it was so easy, right? So what can you do? So maybe you need to take a really good hard look at your own practice, because you need to understand the things that are impacting the value negatively so that you can mitigate them if possible, and things that are providing potential for you to improve the value. So let's talk about first your patients, and we're going to come back to this in more in depth in a little bit, but is your patient base growing? Is it going to continue to grow? Are you spending your money wisely? Just like Nick just mentioned, do you have upside potential? Are you underproducing? How about introducing new technologies? A lot of people say, oh, you got to put this, CEREC machine in your practice. Oh, no, you got to do this. You got to upgrade to this kind of equipment. Look, there's a big difference between things that add value to your practice and things that add saleability and marketability. And presuming that we still have enough time and I don't talk too much, then near the end of our conversation tonight, then I'm going to share a couple of slides with you specifically regarding that particular point. But all of the issues that I'm looking at in the poll, and you can let me know when we've got results for that, Nick.
Oh, we're definitely getting them in, and
good, that's good.
They're interested.
So renovating the office to make it look sleek and modern, that is going to absolutely add to the saleability and the marketability of your practice, but in and of itself will not change the value of your practice. Investing in new equipment and technologies to modernize it, again, will increase the saleability and the marketability, and it may have the opportunity to increase the revenues generated. It'll certainly maybe improve the experience of you as an owner, of your staff, and of your patients in some ways. Hiring better staff or training existing staff. Which one of those is, that's almost two different things. Training your existing staff better is maybe more important than necessarily hiring new staff or better staff. How about investing more into marketing to drive patients? Well, that only makes sense if you're actually retaining the patients that you're gaining. And I'm going to let Nick talk a little bit about that later too. So yes, that could. You definitely need patients. How about investing more to improve the patient experience? That's an awesome thing to do, because if you've got an issue with patient retention and you're not growing as much as you think you should based on your new patient counts, then absolutely maybe there's something with the patient experience that isn't working well. How about investing in hiring specialists to do more services in-house? While that will increase the revenue you generate, it doesn't necessarily increase the value of the practice. So can we see results?
Yeah. So number one, invest in new technologies, equipment and technologies to modernize the practice is the most popular, followed by invest in hiring, better staff or training your existing staff. And the third runner-up would be invest in hiring specialists to do more in-house services. Again, there's no wrong answer. There is each of these things can definitely have an impact, but it's interesting to talk about, an impact how, because, equipment, you mentioned something quite interesting. Yes, it'll add more value to the practice. Does it necessarily drive more production? It depends how you use it, how you market it. So a lot of these things are sort of like intermingled, I would guess, but what do you think?
Absolutely. I also think it depends on, what stage in your career are you at? If you're 3 months from selling, maybe now's not the right time to invest in, $200,000 in equipment, because that will not improve your value by $200,000, period. Will improve that marketability again, saleability, but it won't improve the value per se. So just increasing revenue by itself doesn't always necessarily result in an increased value. Oops, did I do that?
No, yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to move on. So let's talk about more things you can do. Have you ever done an analysis of your cost structure? Do you understand? Because, if we're going to increase revenue, we talked about things that might just increase revenue. We just talked about some of them. But what about your cost structure? Because it's a seesaw. You need both to get to the right balance for value. Too many expenses and your value is going to go down. Too much revenue with that's not sustainable might also cause your value to actually decrease over time. So have you done that? What about your primary costs, your most frequent costs, and what about secondary costs? Have you ever done an analysis? Are you giving away money through co-payments or write-offs, an overly generous discount policy, or undermanaged AR? What about just being understaffed or overstaffed? And do your practice hours match the needs of your patient base? So let's talk about revenue for a second. The only thing that creates revenue in your practice is, in fact, patients. New equipment by itself does not create more revenue, nor does the best trained staff or the best location or the most up-to-date equipment, nor does fantastic decorating. None of those things actually create revenue. Only your patients create revenue. So if you don't have bottoms sitting in the chairs, you're not generating any revenue. So it's really important to understand the trends that your patient base is seeing and how to decrease attrition and how to increase the number of overall patients. And you want good patients too. You want patients that you know you're going to be able to educate into high IQ patients, high hygiene IQ in particular. So a good appraisal is going to show you all of those trends using real data. So it's no guesswork in here, no estimates, no guesstimates. This is about the hard facts for your practice so you can see year over year results and figure out what's going on. Let's talk about,
just to jump in there.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting, so I kind of how we got connected with Tier 3 years ago, is one of our clients was doing a practice audit every few years, and I found that a bit bizarre. I was like, well, like, are you looking to sell your practice or what's going on? And he said, no, actually, it helps me figure out whether I'm on the right track, kind of like monitor like different parts of my business. And I never really thought about it that way, that like, if you get a valuation done, it's not necessarily to sell it. Sometimes it's kind of like doing an x-ray to see how do you measure up compared to other offices, right? Because I think one of the advantages, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, Tier 3, it's like if you're doing a lot of appraisals, you kind of have a good database of, what does the average practice look like? What is normal? What isn't normal? Because as a dentist, it's not like you can just go into the competitor down the street, walk into their office and start poking around to see, like, what's your collection rate? What's your retention rate? How like, what's your treatment acceptance, right? Like, you're not going to get any of that kind of data. But often, like, when dentists are trying to like increase the value of their practice, they're trying to drive more patients. They kind of just try a lot of random strategies to see if something works. And I think we're, like doing some sort of an appraisal or having some sort of audit done gives you a better understanding of, what are you actually really strong at? Then you're probably doing better than other people that you really should continue to focus on. What are some areas that maybe, could be improved? But I would imagine the value really comes from having done this for so many offices. You really get a sense of like, what are the top practices doing and how are they look? How do their numbers look different?
Spot on, exactly. And that's where a large data-driven appraisal company is perhaps your best starting point if you're looking to improve your value and improve your ownership experience, because we do have that. We have literally thousands of appraisals that we've done over the years. We can understand exactly the implications of some of the numbers we see, and we can suggest to you things that might be causing downwards trends or things that are contributing to upwards trends if you're not even sure why you're growing. So we can let you know, and we can help you to understand whether you need to start to staff up. Otherwise, you're going to hit a ceiling, and now your patient numbers are going to start to decrease again because you won't be able to service these patients. So all of these things are critical, and your accountant is a critical partner for you through your entire career to help you to understand this stuff as well. So it's not just Tier 3 or another brokerage. So question number 2, this is what you wanted to talk about.
So yeah, these are the sort of the questions that I wanted to, sort of like pick Barb's brain on. But one of the things that we see a lot of is dentists focusing on, like, we talked before, you need to get more patients. That's what's really going to drive the value of the practice. But I think that another important element is you need to retain them. So we've had a lot of conversations with clients where they're like, I can see you adding 200, 300, 400 new patients every year, but my active patient count isn't going up by that much. Like, what the heck is going on? It's like, yeah, you have a lot of holes in the bucket, because for every, 3 people you sign up, you actually lose one, and you're not even realizing that this is happening, right? So yeah, like it's the one element of it is like, okay, get more patients. But another way to do that is just like reduce the spillage, right? Like fill up the holes in the bucket so that you don't have to keep pouring as much water. You actually, you retain a lot of that, like hard work you're putting into like driving patients. It's not going out the window, from the back end kind of thing.
Exactly. So what I will tell you, for those of you out there that don't know, is every practice loses somewhere between 8 and 10% of their patient base every year. Think about that for a minute. If you've got 1,000 patients, you're going to lose about 100 patients every year. That's normal attrition. Those are patients that they pass away, they move away, they lose their insurance, they just decide to jump ship and try someone else. For whatever reason, you are going to lose some patients. So you need to take a look at your new patient flow, and you need to be able to understand, is your new patient flow enough to offset that? But guess what? The best practices that we appraise, they actually have attrition that's closer to 4 or 5%. It's not sitting at the average of 10% or 11%. So it is possible to achieve a much lower attrition. I have some clients whose only patient loss every year are patients that actually pass away. They don't lose their patients ever. They have patients who will drive 200 miles back to them because they love them so much. So that's the practice you want to have, right? You want to be that person too. So when you're looking at, and we get an appraisal, we provide a lot of data with regards to the patient base. And I want to show you 3 quick examples. These are year-over-year comparisons for this particular practice. You can see that, started off at 800, went to 826, landed at 800, pretty stable practice for the most part. And obviously in these 2 years, not losing 10% of their patient base. Otherwise they would have declined more, a little bit more loss between this year and that year. If I look at a year-over-year trend and I look at 1 year versus the past 2 years, you can see it's showing a nice trend. It looks nice visually. And this is where I want to point out to you to be careful of the information that you read in an appraisal, because in actual fact, it may be smoke and mirrors. So again, if we look at this chart, really stable. In actual fact, a little bit of decline. If I only showed you this chart, looks like it's growing. But that's because you're comparing 12 months to 24 months. So you need to be aware of that kind of thing. Our appraisals, we share this information with you as owners, but we would not share this information with the buyer particularly. But what we do is we show you an attrition and delinquency analysis based on 12-month patient count so that you can understand, oh, I went down by 47 patients, but I gained 57. That's why I grew. Here I went down by 117. What happened during this time frame that caused that to happen? And this is very small, so I don't know how well you're able to read this, but this is our benchmarking analysis page. And this one gives you so much data. It lets you know what your hygiene compliance rate is. So how many of your regular patients have you converted to be regular hygiene patients? It lets you know who's overdue for a hygiene recall appointment, how many of those people there are, and we can give you some advice on how to reactivate those people. It tells you about your productivity, your hygienist productivity per hour and your doctor productivity per hour. It talks about your cost efficiencies, and it gives you key opportunities and actually shows you the actual amount and value that your practice could gain if you were to get a handle on some of these problems. Very quickly, I'm going to show you another practice. Look at about 800 patients too, if you look at that middle bar. But look what happened between 2022 and 2023 in this practice. So if you look at that, this doesn't look so bad. That looks not that dissimilar from the other chart, which is the 1 and 2 year snapshot. But look at the attrition in this practice. So something major went on in this practice. So if this is your practice, you need to understand what. Like, did you have a program?
It's important to analyze like where that hole is, because there could be many different things. Just like there's many different ways to grow the value, there's many different things that can contribute to sort of like a decline. And instead of just like throwing different things at the wall, and where I see a lot of dentists do is they hire very expensive consultants to come in and diagnose all these problems. But sometimes just having like a financial report just makes it easier to sort of pinpoint where the problem may be, because you can then look at, okay, well, who were those 385 that we lost?
Exactly.
And is there a pattern there? Like, what can we learn from that? Is it that they moved? Did they not have a good experience? If they didn't have a good experience, like, well, who did a lot of these people go to? I mean, is it a particular hygienist? Like, what happened here, right? And you can very quickly get to sort of the root of the problem and start, plugging holes that way. But yeah, like you bring a good point of, depending on how you look at the data, somebody trying to sell you a practice can present in a very beautiful way. But if you're looking at this appraisal as, how can I figure out how to, where's my weaknesses? It can be quite powerful, right? But you need to be careful when you're, I guess we'll cover this more in the next webinar about how to buy a practice and ways that you might get bamboozled. But the more data we've gathered over time, the more it helps us really fix the root issues that are causing them to bleed patients. And then naturally you'll just keep growing more because you stopped the leak.
So what I can tell you about this particular practice is a couple of things contributed to this huge patient loss, one of which was like a partner left and took patients with them. So now that's not great for the practice overall. And yet, if this practice was for sale, if the sales rep or the transition consultant knew that, then they would be able to help speak to that so that it would not be as big a negative in the eyes of the buyer. It would be an understandable, situation that had happened. This could also be as simple as a new front desk person who doesn't understand how to use the software and has deactivated people that they shouldn't deactivate in error, and now they're not getting called to come back in. That happens way more frequently than you could imagine, guys. So training that staff better is critical.
I definitely speak to that. Like, what we started doing about 2 years ago is looking at the patient management system for some of these offices to try to diagnose maybe what the issues are. And what we found in probably 9 out of 10 cases is most staff don't really know how to use that software all that well. I mean, patient management systems typically are very clunky software. Even if you look at some of the better ones like Open Dental, they're confusing and cumbersome, and there's a million features that most people don't really know how to use, right? When you look at a lot of receptionists, they get hired, they are shown, this is where you sit, this is the chair, this is the desk, this is the phone, here's your computer, you said you know what you're doing, go for it, right? So it's very easy to kind of like screw up the data there, or maybe like deactivate the wrong people. All of a sudden now they're not getting follow-ups, or you're removing opportunities that actually could be reactivated, largely because your staff might not even know how to use the system itself. Right?
That's something that I definitely speak to. So you're talking about a new person coming in and being plunked down, and so what happens about the new person who comes in, and Sally, who's been the receptionist for 30 years, teaches them all her bad habits. Oh, this is great. This is how we do the practice here. This is how this practice runs.
Yeah.
So even an old dog or a new dog, they can learn new tricks. And so this is an area that you might want to consider spending some money on. And for the record, Nick, I don't consider Open one of the best ones. But anyways, that's all good. Okay. Go ahead.
So before we move on to the next piece, so I could definitely speak a bit more to that. So we have some clients, for example, that run multiple offices. And I've always found it shocking how you would think if you look at each of the offices, they would all kind of function the same. There'd be a standard sort of way of doing things. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, you will sometimes look at one office and they have a completely radically different way of using the exact same patient management system as another. Sometimes you look at one office and they have amazing notes. They know exactly when the patient came in, what they were kind of looking for, where the conversation was left. It says, oh, she wants to continue treatment, but she's on vacation for 3 months. Let's follow up in, at the end of July. And then you go into the exact same patient management system at a different office that's owned by the same dentist. And it's just like, there's nothing in there. Like if you were to ask any of the staff, like, what happened to this person? Like, I think Joanne talked to him. Well, you talked to Joanne. Well, what happened with that person? Oh, I don't remember. Right. So it's not so much of, do you use Open Dental or Dentrix or Able Dental? They're all kind of terrible, in my opinion, as a software developer. They're not great software. But definitely like a common theme I see is there isn't a lot of strategy for how to use it correctly, how to identify potential opportunities. And it's something that's like, it's a very low hanging fruit. I mean, just spending a bit of time trying to find the patients that haven't been coming back, trying to figure out why they haven't been coming back, trying to figure out which ones you have a chance of actually getting back in, and coming up with a plan for how to contact them. It could drive a ton of patients, more so than if you had spent $10,000 on marketing that month. So exactly. I think people kind of forget about, how do you make the most of what you already have rather than always trying to look for new people. Yeah.
So question, can I answer this question? So what I want to do just before that is I'm actually curious to find out whether some of the attendees here, whether they have had an appraisal done, whether they get appraisals done regularly. Because when I first, one of our clients told us that he does this every 2 years, it kind of surprised me. I didn't realize that
it's like, well, like I thought, don't you do that only when you're trying to sell? But I'm curious to find out, do a lot of people think like this, or, sort of like, yeah, how often have you guys had an appraisal done? Has it been years? Did you get it done regularly? Or, yeah, when's sort of the last time you've had one done?
So you asked, as a buyer, how can you ensure that the patient count is accurate and I'm assuming you're talking about an appraisal that you're reading. I can tell you that if it's with tier 3, it's 1000% accurate. So we are very, very detail oriented. I think we are the only appraisal company that actually provides exact patient counts. And that's as of the date that we took those patient counts. So if you go in 4 months later, the patient's counts may have shifted, but if you looked at the exact same date frame that we did, you would find the same numbers. I think it is important that you do very good due diligence. So there is no way for you to ensure that patients that should have been inactivated were inactivated. But in tier 3, our patient counts are based on a unique number of patients that visited the practice within the time frame described and had a treatment bill. So we do not use an active patient count from the software, because for that very reason. So if you go in and you run a practice summary report or a list of all of the patients in the practice that are active, you're going to get people for sure. It doesn't matter how good a practice is, you're going to get people in there that should have been deactivated that have not been deactivated yet or inactivated. So there is no way of doing that, but you can know that with tier 3, our patient counts are the patient is only counted if they had a treatment billed during the time frame that we described. So it is very accurate, and that's one of the benefits of tier 3. If you're a buyer and you're looking at another company's appraisal, tier 3 offers a due diligence report, and you can hire us to help gather some of this information for you as part of your due diligence if you want to. Okay, so what's our poll results? You're muted, Nick.
Sorry about that. So most people, almost 70%, haven't had one done or don't remember the last time they had one done. A few people actually get it done regularly every 1 to 4 years, but yeah, it's very polarized, which is kind of what I expected to see, because again, I think part of what the issue is when I looked at it, as somebody who's like trying to help practices grow, I saw a lot of value in these reports, in not from just like, how do I need to do this to sell the practice or to buy a practice or whatever. It was more to figure out what's wrong with it. But I think most brokerages, they don't necessarily promote it that way. Or I think most dentists don't even think about it that way. They think it's like, this is a document you need to generate when you're ready to exit. Whereas I kind of looked at it as, actually, there's a lot of value even if you have no plan to sell it, right? Because you can get a lot of really good information about where there might be problems. But where it's also super valuable is, how do you measure up to, like, how do those metrics measure up to the hundreds of other offices out there, right? Because ultimately, dentistry is super competitive. I mean, you're not in a silo. Like, if a patient goes on Google and he's typing, dentist near me, and there's a lot of options to pick from, right? So having a better understanding of, what parts are you excelling at and what parts are, maybe not doing as well, and like laser focusing your effort there. So I don't fault dentists. I mean, I think most of them, until I had that one client kind of explain how they use that, I always assume this is something you just don't do until you're ready to sell, right? And that's the whole point of this conversation, is I think that it's the wrong way to think about it. And also, a disclaimer, there's no like kickback system here. I don't care if you do an appraisal. I don't care if you go with Henry Schein or any other brokerage out there. They're not writing us a check every time we convince somebody to get an appraisal. I don't particularly care. All I can say is the clients who've had appraisals, we usually ask for them, because I go through the data and I start to figure out exactly where their attrition comes from, and it's super helpful. So I think if people use that data, you could drive a lot of value that way. But there's no, we're not trying to, I'm not here to sell people on like, hey, go get your proposal done. I don't really care about that. I just think that there's a lot more value than people think.
Muted.
Oh, now
So,
you're
yeah, I was muted. So why should you consider getting an appraisal if even if you're not looking to sell? It's a really good question. And so reasons that people get an appraisal in anticipation of the sale, just like Nick talked about, that's probably still the number one reason. How about to future plan or estate plan? I'm always sad every single year when we get a phone call from the spouse of a dentist saying that their spouse has unexpectedly either gotten a critical diagnosis or perhaps even passed away, and now they're scrambling to try and get an appraisal done. And when it goes on the market, unfortunately, people out there are vultures, and they perceive that to be a fire sale, even if they shouldn't be. For marital purposes, divorce or prenups, to financially restructure one or more corporations, to set up a partnership or dissolve a partnership. So just like divorce and prenup, yeah, we do a lot of work divorces as well, to obtain financing. Maybe you want to buy another practice, you want to expand, you want to become that small investor. But what about just improving practice value? That is the second biggest reason that we actually do appraisals. And one that's sort of underrated is an appraisal will help you improve your ownership experience, and it will help you to reduce your stress because you'll know what to worry about, what not to worry about, what's working really well. You're able to pat yourself on the back about a whole pile of things, and you're going to be able to at least understand what steps you need to take to move forward. So go ahead.
So before you go further, let me share a bit of knowledge from sort of a different industry. So you often hear, like, we run a software company, and a lot of people that work in this sort of field, their dream is to build a company, grow it, scale it, and ultimately have a big exit, right? Especially if you're getting venture capital, this is what your investors are looking for. Now, whenever you hear it, and I've had a lot of colleagues who maybe have sold a company to Google, it sounds amazing. It's like, oh, wow, right? Until you realize, yeah, they're not living on a yacht. There's a lot of sales that happen in businesses, not just dentistry, where let's just say it sounds impressive that you got acquired until you really dig into the details and you realize, yeah, they're not the ones who came out on top. Sometimes, if you're not selling a practice when you're in a great position where you don't need to sell it, you're doing great, it's growing really well, that's when you're going to have a really good exit. But if you're selling it because you kind of got caught with your pants down and something happened that you didn't expect and you didn't really plan things correctly, the company who buys it, like you said, there's a lot of vultures out there. They're not there to make friends. They're there to see, opportunities. And sometimes I've seen, not necessarily in dentistry, but in many other industries where people spend a lot of time working hard to build something. They screw up that last bit, and they ultimately, pay the price for it. They kind of walk away with leaving what I think would have been a ton of money on the table. So in other industries, when you're talking about like metrics, most companies know them very well. Like most software companies, if you were to ask them, like, what's your acquisition rate? What's your conversion rate on new customers? What's the average lifetime value? What's the average subscription time? What's the churn rate? Most serious companies absolutely know these numbers. I've always found it interesting with dentistry, very few of them know. Like if you were to ask them, like, how many active patients do you have? They have a rough kind of idea in their head, and sometimes they're kind of close to it, but more times they're not. And part of it is just the whole business is very different. In my business, I can sit back and I can look at data and I can gather reports and I can make decisions. But the dentists, they're in the operatory every day. They're the ones that have to see the patients. They have to deliver dentistry, so they don't have the sort of freedom or the time that other businesses would have. And why, even if you don't have the time to do it yourself, it's important that you have it done for you. Ideally, you can get a lot of this data in an appraisal. If you're purely using it to understand how to grow your practice, you can get it yourself. But, you kind of have to weigh, do I make more money by seeing more patients, or do I make more money by spending hours and hours trying to figure out how to do all these reports within, whatever patient management system that you're using? And so just a little tidbit, even if you don't want to sell, you always want to position yourself where if something unexpected happens, you're not going to get screwed because you've been spending a lot of time, improving it. So, if anything unexpected happens, you're still coming out with a great deal.
Exactly. And so So not just about getting more at the time of a sale, but just when and why would you want to improve your value? You want to do it now. Do it throughout your entire career. So you're going to pay off your loan sooner. You're going to bring home more money. You could expand, buy another practice. You can maybe retire sooner than you thought you were going to retire because you've been able to improve your value so much. So if you're feeling stressed, you'd be like, oh, I can see my exit, my finish line. It's a year and a half away from me, whatever the case may be. So when should you get an appraisal? It's now. If you own a practice, it's never too soon to get an appraisal. So realize those value improvements now and throughout your entire sort of ownership experience. Spend your money on the right initiatives with the right experts, reduce your stress, improve your ownership experience. So it's the first step in doing that.
Yeah. So just to, again, I want to reiterate that, for anyone that feels like we're here to just sort of pitch proposal, appraisals, that's not what it's all about. As a data company, I mean, RevUp has, what makes us really great at driving patients is not necessarily because we're great at SEO or building websites. Most of it has to do with digging deeper into what's wrong with someone's practice than, any other marketing company out there does. So people sort of approach it from, they're searching for external solutions to what is virtually almost always an internal problem. What sort of like limits us is we don't have, as for RevUp Dental, we don't have that same sort of financial knowledge as like a brokerage like Tier 3, where, let's look at collection rates. Let's look at, what is the cost per patient? What is the production per patient? Our experience doesn't extend that far into sort of the nuts and bolts of how you run a practice. Like I wouldn't be able to tell you, is your, hygiene percentage looking good, or is it a bit off? What you're spending on supplies, does that look normal, or is that, it's far beyond our capabilities? And that's why we wanted to have this sort of discussion that, I really do think Tier 3, can help you understand these things, and dive a lot deeper than, maybe we could only get to sort of like a surface level. I think you guys, I was very impressed when I went through some like practice appraisals, just how much data there was there and just how much value you can extract out of that if you sat there and you like really analyzed it. And you sort of like got to work thinking like, how can I change some of these metrics? Like if I pull these levers a little bit, how can I maybe like fine tune this engine to run a lot smoother?
Sorry, I got it. So let's talk about the things, how you understand those issues that are impacting that experience, positive or negatively. And what about the experience of your staff and your patients? Because the second most valuable resource in your practice after your patients are your staff members. Because again, it's great if you have all the bottoms sitting in the chairs, but if you don't have any staff to help treat them, then you're still not going to generate any revenue, are you? So things that you can do, and some of these you can do by yourself. Potentially, you don't always need an appraisal, and there's never an obligation to get an appraisal at any point in your career. It's always an option. It's out there as a resource that you can choose to activate or not. And appraisals do not come with an obligation to sell ever. Okay, an appraisal is just an appraisal is an appraisal, so you're never going to get any pressure to turn that appraisal into a sale. Okay, selling is always a personal decision that makes sense at the time. So I'll put that out there too. And also, just like Nick, we don't get any kickback if we recommend that our clients reach out to RevUp, which we do fairly often actually. So looking at things like your, that production per hour, downtime. Have you ever done an assessment of your downtime, and what is everybody doing during downtime? Referrals in and out of the practice. It's great to know if you maybe are looking to get an associate, because maybe you can get an associate that can meet that need of your patients. What about treatment compliance? Like Nick mentioned, what percentage of your patients proceed with treatments presented? Do you have any idea? Do you track it even? Systems, all of those systems we talked about. What about purging? How often is this being done in your office, and how does your practice handle inactivation, which speaks to that question that we were given a little bit, a few minutes ago. So how does your practice handle that? Do you have rules around that, or is it just done on a willy-nilly, and every once in a while someone goes in and deactivates people? What about computer utilization? Are you training your staff so that they fully understand how to maximize all of the features of the software, because they all have great features, even if they're ugly to use. They all have great features that could help you to be able to improve the value. And your recall system, do you have a pulse of who's delinquent? Here's another example, of that delinquency chart that goes along with every single one of our appraisals. How often are you reviewing that, and who's doing the follow-up? What about your soft tissue management program? Again, do you know how many patients are hygiene patients out of your total patient base? Do you know the retention? Do you know if they're coming in on their, recommended intervals? Are you stuck on a blinder so that your staff say, in our practice, we only ever do 2 units of scaling and a half a unit of polish? Is that what you're doing? Or are you trying to overcome insurance dictation where you have patients that might have greater needs than what their insurance allows? Do you have a way of helping your staff to be able to have that conversation with those patients? And again, hopefully the appraisal that you're going to get from whatever company you're going to get it from, they're just going to show you how you stack up. And, you're the green, the averages are the blue. How do you compare to other practices based, again, on hundreds and hundreds of practices? So,
just to jump in here, what I find is a lot of the day-to-day operations, it's not like everyone sat down and they came up with a strategy and they thought, okay, of all of the options available, I think this is the best way to handle things. It's just random. It's like they hired a particular receptionist who had a particular way of doing things, and then she taught that method to the next receptionist. And it reminds me of, I don't know if this is actually true, but it definitely gets the point across. There's this study done with chimpanzees, trying to figure out, sort of psychological behavior. And they had a room where, there was a ladder that, you go up the ladder, you push a button, and you get handed a banana, right? So pretty soon, all chimpanzees start to understand, you go up the ladder, you push the button, you get a banana. Then they did a bit of an experiment, right? They, changed it so that when you push the button, yes, you get the banana as the reward, but it would spray all the other chimpanzees in the room with cold water. Well, it didn't take long before everyone understood, like, you don't go up there and press the button because everyone's going to beat you up, right? So then they took half of the chimpanzees out of this room. So you think you have the first cohort, you take half of them out and they bring in a fresh batch that didn't understand how this mechanism worked. They just knew, you push the button, you get the banana. Or they saw, hey, there's a button, let's see what happens. And of course, all the chimpanzees from the first group would beat them up if they tried to push the button. But they didn't understand why you're not supposed to push the button. They never got to being able to push and put 2 and 2 together, that the water gets sprayed and everyone gets wet. And no. They just learned, you don't touch the button, you don't go at the ladder, you don't look at the ladder because you're going to get beat up. Then they took all of the chimpanzees from the first original group. So now you had group 2 and they added a group 3. What they found really interesting was the ones in group 2 who didn't know why you're not supposed to go up the ladder, they kept enforcing the rule. So when the group 3 would come in, they don't know why there's a button, let's go push it. The ones from group 2 would beat them up and stop them from doing it. But the ones in group 2 didn't have any clue why you're not supposed to do that, right? So this is what happens in businesses too. It's like a rule was set in place, whether, when you bought the practice or the staff that were there, or arbitrarily somebody made some random decision about how you do something. And then everyone just kept doing it that way. And oftentimes when we work with clients and we kind of dig into, why are you scheduling that way? Like, this patient didn't need an appointment right away. Why did you put them in for tomorrow? Because now when somebody calls in that has an emergency, you no longer have any room. And now you got to schedule them 3 weeks out. Like, what is the logic here? And you realize quickly there is no logic because there's just a lot of chaos in an office. I mean, the receptionist, you're getting phone calls all the time. There's people throwing papers in your face. You got to, reschedule this guy for this. And, there's somebody being checked out. There's too much going on and nobody really has the time to sit back and look at the big picture and start to see like, hey, how can we fine tune some things? Probably most of what we're doing is okay, but what are some little areas that we could put a little bit of focus and just, over time kind of improve them, right? So a lot of the things you're talking about, like what is our process for purging patients? What is our process for handling really anything? I've yet to see a practice that has any of this written down or really put a lot of thought into it. The answer is always, well, that's just how we've always done it, right? And that's why you get to where you get to, right? Like that's why when you look at the practices, they're doing double, triple the production of, the average practice. They don't do things like that. It wasn't just random where, I don't know, we just kind of do it our way. We never thought about it. It just kind of worked. No, you'll never have that happen. They are very meticulous about, let's question everything we do. Is this the best way to do it? Maybe it was the best way 10 years ago. Is this really still the best way today? Is it still the best way to, present treatment this way? And then when you start to question that, you start to make little changes and, ultimately you'll see that green graph be a lot higher than the blue one in a lot of the areas that matter and a lot of the areas that are ultimately going to, allow you to achieve a higher practice valuation.
Exactly. So what makes a valuation from an unbiased appraiser? And again, we aren't just promoting them, but we're improving. We want you to help improve your practice, and this is one of the best ways you can start to make those improvements. That's the point of this tonight, but it's not the only way you can do it. Why is an appraisal one of your most useful tools, not your only tool? Okay, so I'm going to talk about for a split second. I'm going to give a little analogy now. Hopefully it won't take too long. Everyone who's attending who's a dentist, that as a GB, you can do a lot of things. You can do a little bit endo, a little bit oral surgery. You can do aligners. You can do basic restorative treatments. You can do just a little bit of everything. And sometimes you can do a lot of some things because you've developed an interest in it. But things like a 5-canal retreat in your practice, if you're not an endodontist, you're going to send it to an endodontist. That is a little bit beyond the scope of your abilities. And so your regular lawyer, if he's not dental industry specific, your regular accountant, if he is not dental industry specific, your regular training and marketing team, if they are not dental industry specific, and lease negotiators and employment lawyers and appraisers, if this is not the one and only thing they do, then they just cannot handle your practice valuation, nor your sale, nor your purchase. If you're a purchaser, this is a 5-canal retreat. This is the one time in your career that you need to go to the specialist to make sure you get the right help. It's really important. So your appraiser is going to squeeze out every potential dollar of value in your practice. That's their job. And they're going to give an unbiased opinion, and they do not have an agenda because your appraiser is not the person who's going to implement any changes you need. So as an appraiser, I will tell you the things, the observations I see about your practice based on the data and the numbers. And I'm going to tell you, you need to get a handle on this, or I can see this is too much. But I don't have an agenda because I'm not going to implement those changes for you. So it really is from an unbiased standpoint. And the best thing about most appraisals is you can get an update in 2 or 3 years at a really nominal cost, which will allow you to actually see the impact of any improvements you put in place. So getting that base appraisal done allows you to, like next first clients, just to come back in 2 years and say, okay, I made this change and this change and this change. Oh my God, that's where my value is now? Fantastic.
Yeah, they used it like a roadmap,
exactly.
a sort of like, okay, we're going to get, some data, try to figure out, because, there's a lot going on in an office, and generally these are small businesses. I mean, you're not dealing with, rev up, I think we're at like over 50 employees. There's a lot of people you can assign to do things, right? Yeah. In a non-typical office, I mean, if you have one receptionist, 1 or 2 receptionists, an office manager, I mean, these people are stretched very thin to their breaking point. You're never going to find harder working people. There's a lot going on in an office. Most of our staff, which are amazing, probably wouldn't be able to function all that effectively in an office with how much you have to juggle. So the way they were using it is more, okay, let's see where we're at compared to other practices. And let's see what are the 1 or 2 things we can just kind of focus on, because we don't have a ton of money. We can't throw millions of dollars at this problem. We can't throw a ton of bodies at it. We have to be a little bit more strategic. Okay. And then they would stick with those initiatives for 1 to 2 years. And then when they do another appraisal, typically those metrics that they were focusing on definitely improved, and so did their valuation. And then they would, with the new sort of data, they would pick sort of a new direction, a new initiative. And this client, I mean, grew to multiple offices very quickly. And you can see why. Like it's very slow and steady. Like, let's do a lot of thinking before we commit to a direction. Once we commit to it, let's stick with it for enough time for it to really work. Then we'll do another confirmation, like, did we make progress? And now where do we go from here? Whereas a lot of other offices, I feel like they're constantly bouncing to ideas. Let's try this. Let's try this. Let's try this. And then all it creates is kind of like whiplash for your staff. And I've seen a lot of stuff, like a lot of the staff that we talk to, they have the attitude of just smile and nod because he's going to get bored of this in a couple of weeks. And then there's going to be some other new thing he read somewhere on Facebook, and we're going to, do that. And, the best way to just go along with it. They're going to lose interest and whatever, right? And that's just not a healthy business to have if your people think this way, right? So I think it's important that you get the data of, like, where am I really at compared to everyone else? What are we really going to commit to and go all in on? Not for, we're going to go all in for a couple weeks and see what happens. That doesn't mean anything. It's like really commit to a plan of, like, we're going to focus on our collections and our, patient reactivation. We're going to just become experts at this one piece over the next year. And some people think, like, okay, but what else? What about the marketing? What about this? It's like, none of it matters. Just focus, just do that one part really, really well. And then from there, another part. And then you look at it 5 years down the line, and that practice is doing like $2-3 million, whereas everyone else around them is maybe $700 to $1 million, right? So sometimes just like doing it slower, being a bit more methodical, like really doing a lot of research before you commit to something is a lot smarter than just, experimenting with a different marketing strategy, a different idea, every single month.
So I don't need to spend any time on this, but if anyone ever wants to know what a broker does, I hope you were able to read that in the background. So I didn't really talk about your accountant and your lawyer too much, but your accountant can save you 1/4 of the taxes. Like, you might lose 25% of your practice value at the time of the sale if you are not set up and your corporation isn't structured properly from an accounting standpoint. I can't underestimate that, guys. You sell for $1 million. Do you want to lose $250,000 of that to taxes? No, you do not. Make sure you have a really good accountant, and you need to engage that dental specific accountant at least 3 years ahead of time. At least, guys, you really do, because that's how long it takes to fix some of the issues that could be in your practice. And you need a very good dental lawyer, because you do not want there to be any post-sale liabilities that you end up getting stuck with. Okay, so very good lawyer and a very good accountant, very important at the time that you purchase and the time you sell. So this is you. On this entire slide's all about you, about RevUp, really. So, where are you going to spend your money? So like I said, an appraisal will highlight things and that are impacting you positively and negatively, but the right firm can help you spend any improvement dollars on the right projects.
Yeah. And to speak to that, we often tell clients, like, look, if you had a choice, okay, let's say you've got a budget to do one of two things. You can either get an appraisal done and try to figure out what's wrong with your business and how it measures up to everyone else is doing, or you can get us to build you a new website or do some SEO or whatever. I would say do the first one, because it's so much easier to help you after that. Because if I have that data, then it's a lot easier to say, okay, this is where I think we need to put in the time and the effort and the resources, because there's parts that you're doing really well, but if we just now that we know exactly where the holes in the bucket are, if we just spend a couple months patching that up, your revenue is going to go up tremendously. Your patient acquisition is going to go up tremendously, because you're not bleeding patients anymore. That data is what help that client I was talking about earlier, like, really ramp things up. And they had the highest patient growth in, I think maybe 5-10 years since they were working with us. And it wasn't because we were just really amazing with marketing. We were able to use that data to figure out exactly where they're bleeding patients. And once you patch up those holes, it's much easier to help them, If like, it's much easier for you to do your job as a dentist if you have an X-ray. It's a lot easier for a marketing company to help you if we kind of have some visibility into like the different elements, like how is your hygiene doing, what is your production per patient, what is your treatment acceptance rate, what is your billables per service. It gives us a lot to go. It gives us a really good roadmap to know where to start and how to take things from there.
So we just have a couple minutes left, but I think it's really important to understand that remember I talked at the beginning about the differences between impacts on value and impacts on saleability. So value considerations directly impact the value. Saleability don't change the value maybe, but they absolutely influence marketability and saleability. So negative saleability can cause fewer offers to come in at lower value, and great saleability could cause practices to be sold with premium. So whenever you hear about someone and you're like, wow, they sold for 20% premium, that's because they had a fantastic practice filled with a million things that had positive marketability and saleability things. And some things could have negative post-sale liability implications. So I'm not going to read any of these out. I'm going to put it up there for a second so you guys can absorb them, but just for about 15 or 20 seconds, I think you're going to get a copy of the recording of this. You'll be able to look at these things. Things that are highlighted in purple there are things that are directly related to Rev Up and things they can kind of help you with, but the other ones are equally important. And this is ones that are directly impacting value. So if you want to know what's directly impacting value, the other ones are saleability factors, guys. So they're not necessarily impacting your value. These are ones that actually can impact your value, with the ones impacting it the most on the left-hand side there. Okay. And there's appraisal related liability considerations. So when you do get an appraisal done, if you choose to do that at some point in the future, now or in the future, you have to be really honest and you have to disclose stuff in it, because if you get an appraisal done and it does end up being a document that gets used towards a sale of your business, the information that's in it will be relied upon by the purchaser, and it will form a lot of the warranties and the guarantees that you put into the purchase and sale agreement. So if it has inaccuracies, all that can do is open you up to litigation in the future. So please make sure you disclose everything.
And I've seen this happen. Yeah, we work with hundreds of clients at this point, and many of them have sold only to have legal problems down the line because the buyer felt like, well, you misrepresented what was here. And I feel like in some cases it's almost like they were in it. Like, you have two options. You can either spend the time to really fix a lot of things, or you can kind of hide them. But you run a lot of risk if you're trying to hide stuff and you're trying to put a nice spin on everything, because if you're not really handing over a good practice and it just kind of blows up in their face, a lot of people will want some sort of legal recourse, and whether they win or not, I mean, it's a whole different story. But I think it is worth not rushing to sell, taking the time, looking at the data, figuring how to improve things, and doing it all about like by the book. Because I've witnessed this where someone sells a practice and then they're in litigation. And it's not fun. You don't end up winning.
Exactly. Not to interrupt you, but if you do not have time to fix things, because you don't have a lot of time and you kind of want to sell tomorrow, then you might not have time to fix everything, but then you got to share everything. We got to disclose it. I tell every buyer about every wart and pimple on every practice that I sell, but I can usually mitigate that news by saying, but moving forward, this could happen, or this is why this was. So, if we can explain, mitigate, show how to improve, we can get past issues that are there, but we at least have to share what they are. So this is charting your path to the future. Just like you said, it's kind of like building that roadmap. Pre-plan. If you're thinking of selling, at least 3 to 5 years beforehand, understand the issues that are impacting your value negatively and positively. Protect your family and your future. I consider an appraisal at least one, not even if you don't get them done every, 3 to 5 years, which would be the ideal. Get at least one done partway through your career. And if you buy a practice, maybe get one done 5 years into your ownership, so you can see where you are now versus what the value was when you purchased the practice. But get at least one done and put it with your will, so that it if the worst thing that could ever happen happens, your family is not struggling at that worst moment to try and do this. And do you know what percentage of your retirement portfolio that your practice represents? You would not believe. Most people have no idea. And this is your retirement plan, guys. You don't have huge pension plans. Choose that right team. Can't even emphasize that again enough. Choose the right team to work with. And right now, because I'm going to put a little plug in, Nick, if I might, right now, Tier 3 is offering $400. It's a promotion. It was literally launched yesterday on Facebook and Instagram, and I think it's going to launch next week on LinkedIn. But you can get it through me if you just want to reach out. If you want to learn more about your practice, we can give you an appraisal for $400 off. And if you are not ready to sell yet, we have a product called an income valuation, and it determines exactly the same analysis as a full appraisal, but we don't record any of your equipment because it doesn't make sense if you're 12 or 15 or 18 years away from selling. There's no point in actually recording your equipment right now because that's going to change in the future. So $400 off either of those products, and that's me.
Fantastic. So we'll leave it open to questions if you guys have any questions. And I will make one more point. So to play the devil's advocate for a second, if I was the dentist, right, let's say like, hey, I don't want to get one of these done like every 2 years because, the initial one can, be, a couple $1,000s, I believe, right?
For an income valuation, you're talking about $5,000, guys.
Okay. So, I would do one just to see what the data is and what I can learn. And I would just keep updating a lot of those numbers myself if I needed to, right? And now every 5 years, I would still probably get a professional to double check, everything. But I mean, it's bizarre to me in the sense that, you would go and get an x-ray every couple of years. It's good to get a health checkup, it's good to get an x-ray if if you have some sort of like chronic issues. But in businesses, it often, you don't see this too much. Now, I think in my line of work, again, I have the time to sit there and track the metrics and learn how to do this myself. In dentistry, I think what makes it unique is that in the time it would take most dentists to try to pull the same data, they'd probably make like a lot more than $5,000 just doing dentistry, right? And I think that report, you would definitely like show you what you can improve that would drive a lot more than $5,000 worth of value. I can tell you from using the appraisals that some of our clients have gotten and some of the things we've been able to pick out and help them with, some of these changes, could have driven another $50, $100, $200,000 of revenue. Fixing a problem some clients didn't even realize they had, right? So I've
had clients whose values have gone from 800,000 originally. They've had it revalued 3 years later, and it's been sitting at 1.4, 1.5 million, doubled. Mm-hmm. And then 3 years later, again, when they've been ready to sell, they're up over a $2 million value, and they started at 800,000. And they wouldn't have gotten there had they not had the first appraisal done, which allowed them to put through changes. If you don't get at least 6 to 8 actual practical tips on ways to improve your practice, then your appraiser's done a poor job for you.
Yeah, I'll give you another example. So one of the clients we worked with, maybe 2 years ago, they had recently bought an office. It had, about $800,000 in production. It was pretty flat growth, under 3% per year. It was pretty much flat over the last 5 years. But they had, because they just recently bought it, I had asked them, can you give me that data when you made this purchase? Because I'm really curious to dig into the different patient stats and things like that, because it's going to give me a better idea of kind of where to start to sort of plug in the holes. Anyways, a year later, they had gone, they had just under, they were doing under 1.6 million. So it's about 93% growth, pretty substantial. And most of it was not external work. It wasn't because we built a beautiful website. Obviously that helps, right? But a lot of it was just fixing their internal processes, trying to reactivate patients, seeing why people were falling through the cracks, working with their team to stop a lot of that stuff. But yeah, they basically almost doubled the value of their office. And I wouldn't say all of it was because of, this appraisal. They didn't discover some magic, bullet, some switch, you flip it and all of a sudden they were super successful. But it was very valuable. It helped retrain people. They did very well because of it. But it looks like we have a question here. So for those who might not be reading the chat, so how much does it cost when you do the repeat appraisal and you update it like every 3 years?
So it is,
mentioned,
yeah, it is somewhere between $1,500 and $1,800 if every 2 to 3 years. It is based in somewhat on the number of financial statements we have to input. So if you go past 3 years and we've got to start with 3 more years worth of financial statements and 3 more years worth of data, then it's basically you're getting the product again all over again, and then it's sort of the full price again. Other than that, it's $1,500 to $1,800.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I said,
yeah, and,
you spend $5,000 initially, you put all these improvements in place, come back to me in 2.5 years, spend another $1,500 or $1,800, depending on, the timing involved. And, wouldn't it be worth it? And don't forget, any appraisal costs, whether it's through Tier 3, anyone else, and actually, to be frank, some of Nick's services, these are all a deduction too from your corporation's. Like these are allowable deductible expenses that will help, reduce the amount that you pay to Revenue Canada. So there's a little bit of a mini side benefit there to getting these things done too.
Just another quick note too, because I mean, obviously there's a lot of brokerages out there. I mean, not a lot, but there's definitely more than Tier 3, right? So the reason we kind of like formed a strong sort of relationship with Tier 3 early on, because we know all, especially in Ontario, all the other brokers, of all the other options out there, I felt like Tier 3 was the most like really focused on accurate numbers, not like fluff, right? Like, well, what kind of leather do you have on your chairs there? It's like, yes, that matters for sure. But what I really want to dig into is more of the financials, more like, how are you measuring new patients exactly? Because I found even amongst many offices, the way they would define a new patient was very different from another one, right? So I feel like, I'm not going to name any of the other offices, but I feel when it comes to Tier 3, their data, in my opinion, take this with a grain of salt. It's not necessarily coming from an expert, but my background is analytics. It was very accurate and very detailed. It dove into a lot of things that I feel like other brokerages or appraisals that I had reviewed kind of glanced over. Because every time we work with a client that just bought an office, the first thing I do is like, okay, show me the paperwork. Like, I'm curious to see what you looked at when you made this decision to buy, because I want to see what I can learn from there and, kind of come up with a game plan. And I always thought that the Tier 3 brokerage appraisals were a lot more in depth. So, again, they're not paying me to say that. There's no kickback. I don't particularly care, if you go with a different broker. This data is incredibly useful. If you get it, you put it to use, you fix a lot of the internal things, you're going to see a lot more growth than if you spent, 2, 3, 4 times as much throwing it at SEO or Google Ads or social media or anything like that. Once you fixed a lot of those internal issues, and you have, like Barb was saying, some practices only have 3-4% attrition. They really do only lose the patients who passed away. But the average practice might lose 8, 10, 12%. I've had cases where it's as high as 15, 16%. At that point, it makes the marketing so much harder, because you have to spend so much more money trying to get patients in to stop the loss of of blood. And really, new patients are like the blood flow of any practice. But if you guys, I'm going to leave one last poll, and we're just curious to find out what sort of topics or talks you guys would want to see more of, because there's so many topics to cover. We're always curious to learn, what would you like more of? What sort of information? What sort of guides? We have a huge network of, experts such as Barb, and we'd love to get some feedback from you guys about, what's the next event that can drive value for you guys. So if you take a moment to, give us some feedback there, that'd be fantastic. But if there's any other questions, you've got Barb's contact there. She's a great resource to chat with. I've learned a lot from her over the years, and highly recommend you guys reach out if you have any questions. By the way, the next one as well we've got lined up is with Jennifer Blair. So also, sales representative at Tier 3. But we're going to talk about the buying side. So if you're maybe an associate, you're looking to buy your first office, as Barb sort of alluded to, there's ways to kind of like not fudge the numbers, but sort of present it in, maybe a more favorable light. So if you're on the opposite end where it's like, I'm looking to buy an office, how do I make sure I don't get bamboozled? What do I look for? That we're going to have that talk coming up in a few weeks, and you'll get the other perspective of it as well. But most of our clients, they kind of own a practice. I thought this was a better topic to start off with, but obviously there's plenty of dentists that are looking to buy another office, or they're looking to buy their first office, and we're going to cover that part as well. Okay, thank you for coming, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great long Family Day weekend.